An old man's quiet day in the park turns into a shocking moment you won't believe. Watch till the end. Subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. The park was alive with sounds that most people barely noticed. To Harold, however, every rustle, every breeze, every chirp mattered. He had been blind for many years, but he had learned to let the world come to him through sound, scent, and touch. Sitting in his wheelchair near a row of tall, leafy trees, he tilted his head slightly upward, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun against his face. The air was rich with the earthy fragrance of grass, the sweet undertones of blooming flowers, and the distant laughter of children playing somewhere along the pathway. Harold's hands rested calmly on the armrests of his wheelchair. His face, lined with age and struggle, carried a quiet dignity. He often came here, to this park, not because he had anywhere else to go, but because the peace it offered gave him something the rest of the world rarely did anymore: silence free of judgment. People passed by him now and then, some offering a polite nod or a murmured greeting, others ignoring him altogether. He never minded. Simply being present in this space, under the trees, surrounded by life, was enough. For Harold, this park was more than just a piece of land with benches and greenery. It was a refuge. Too many times he had faced cruelty from strangers who saw only his blindness, his wheelchair, his black skin. Too many times he had been treated as though he were invisible, or worse, as though his presence itself was an intrusion. Yet here, at least for brief moments, the world seemed to forget him, and in that forgetting, he found relief. He leaned back slightly, taking in the soft hum of the city at a distance, the low murmur of passing conversations, the shuffle of shoes on pavement, the occasional bark of a dog, all wove together into a tapestry he cherished. His ears were his eyes now, and they painted the world in richer shades than most people ever stopped to notice. As Harold sat in his solitude, he allowed his thoughts to drift. He remembered his younger years, days when his legs still carried him swiftly across basketball courts, when his eyes still saw the world in all its colors. He remembered the sound of his wife's laughter, gone now for many years, and the voices of his children when they were small. Life had changed. Age and hardship had stolen much, but not his ability to appreciate what remained. That was something no one could take from him. But peace is fragile, and in Harold's world, it never lasted long. The rhythm of approaching footsteps broke into his quiet reverie. Heavy, purposeful, not casual like a jogger, or gentle like a child. These steps carried weight, an intention that unsettled him before he even heard the man's voice. "Hey," the voice barked, sharp and cold. "What do we have here?" Harold stiffened. Though he couldn't see, he had heard that tone too many times in his life to mistake it. Authority laced with disdain. A voice that didn't speak to him but down at him. "I'm just sitting, officer," Harold answered softly, hoping calm would diffuse whatever storm threatened to arrive. "Enjoying the day, sir." "Enjoying the day?" the officer scoffed, his words dripping with mockery. "You think this place is meant for you to just park yourself in? You taking up space, old man?" The sting of the words cut deep, though Harold did his best to steady his breathing. He had learned over the years that confrontation often made things worse, especially with men like this. Still, no matter how many times he endured it, the cruelty always struck him in the chest. "Sir," Harold said gently, his voice trembling with the effort to remain respectful, "I'm blind. This is the only place I can—" "Don't give me excuses." The officer's voice grew louder, closer. Harold could feel the man's presence looming over him now, a shadow not seen but felt. "Blind or not, you don't get a free pass. You people think you can do whatever you want, sit wherever you want, waste space. Not while I'm around." Harold's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. His heart raced. The air, which moments ago had been fresh and calming, now felt suffocating. He swallowed hard, fighting the knot in his throat. "I'm not hurting anyone," he whispered. The officer let out a derisive laugh. "Not hurting anyone? You're an eyesore. You're a problem just sitting there." Harold flinched as he felt the sudden jolt of the wheelchair being shoved roughly. The wheels scraped against the pavement as the chair lurched backward. He grasped the armrest desperately, his frail body trembling. "Stop, please!" Harold cried out, the fear in his voice cracking the stillness of the park. But there was no mercy in the man towering over him. The officer sneered, circling him like a predator with prey. Though Harold couldn't see it, he could hear the cruel amusement in his footsteps and the venom in his voice. "What's the matter? Didn't expect anyone to remind you where you belong? Out here, thinking you can just sit around like you own the place? Not on my watch." The shove had rattled Harold's composure, but what broke him further was the sheer humiliation. He had lived with blindness, with loss, with loneliness, but the deliberate attempt to strip him of dignity, to treat him as less than human, was unbearable. And yet he remained quiet, trembling, pleading only in whispers for the torment to stop. The park had grown still again, but not with peace, this time with tension. Somewhere, Harold could sense others were watching. Footsteps slowed, conversations hushed. But no one intervened. The weight of silence from bystanders pressed in on him, just as cruel as the officer's words. Then came the blow he had feared. A sudden impact to his leg as the officer kicked at him, the strike sending pain shooting through his frail body. Harold gasped, clutching at the side of his chair, his voice breaking into a desperate cry. "Please, I'm begging you, stop!" The man's laughter rang out, chilling in its cruelty. To the officer, Harold was not a person, not a man, but a target to be demeaned, a symbol of contempt. And though Harold couldn't know it, this was only the beginning. For fate was already moving pieces into place. Two figures, not far from the park, were finishing their training, walking the same path that would soon cross his. Two men whose presence would change the outcome of this day. But Harold did not yet know this. All he knew in that moment was fear, pain, and the bitter taste of helplessness under the weight of a uniform meant to protect, not destroy. The first kick lingered in Harold's leg like a cold fire, throbbing through bone and muscle until it settled as a dull, relentless ache. He clutched the armrest and tried to breathe through it, counting each inhale to keep panic at bay. Panic never helped. It only fed men like this, men who smelled fear the way wolves smelled blood. "Did I tell you to make noise?" the officer snapped. Harold steadied his voice as best he could. "Sir, please, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just sitting." The wheelchair jerked forward. Hands seized the metal grips and shoved. The front casters bounced over a crack in the pavement, the jolt rattling through Harold's spine. He nearly bit his tongue trying not to cry out. The officer shoved again, harder, and the chair rolled toward the edge of the path where the concrete dipped toward the grass. "Enjoying the park, huh?" the man said, a cruel lilt undercutting every syllable. "Let's take a little tour." "Please," Harold whispered. He dug his heels down instinctively, but the footrests made it impossible to brace. Blindness made the world a shifting map of sound. Now it was a blur of motion, too, his body pitched at the mercy of hands he could not see. The officer spun the chair. Harold's stomach turned with it. The air changed, cooler for a moment as they slipped into a shadow, then warm again as the sun found his face. He had never felt smaller. Not even the day he lost his sight had made him feel so helpless. Back then, there had been grief, yes, but also a resolve to keep moving. This was different. This was being handled, like luggage, not a person. "Sir, you're hurting me." he said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "Hurting you?" The officer laughed, the sound bright and joyless. "You don't know what hurt is." The chair stopped. A heartbeat later came the impact. The same boot, the same vicious angle, driving into Harold's shin. Pain shot upward, hot and sharp. He flinched, hands flying to protect what they could, his chest, his ribs. The officer kicked again, higher this time, catching the frame of the chair and jarring Harold's hip. A hush had fallen over the stretch of park around them. Harold could hear it, the sudden absence of laughter, the way footsteps slowed and hovered. People were watching. He could feel their eyes, their hesitation, their fear of doing the wrong thing, or perhaps their fear of doing anything at all. Bystanders, he thought dimly, that awful word heavy with history. He didn't blame them. He had been a bystander to his own life too many times. "Please," he said again, louder now because the pain stole gentleness from his voice. "Please stop. I'm blind. I'm old. I'm not a threat to you." "That right?" The officer came close, and Harold could smell the sour tang of sweat and aftershave. A gloved finger jabbed his shoulder. "You're a nuisance. Sitting here like you own something. Taking up space. People pay taxes for these parks. You contribute?" The words snapped like a whip. "You contribute anything at all?" Harold swallowed. "I've worked my whole life. I'm not—" The chair lurched backward. One wheel slid into the grass and spun. For a second, Harold felt the terrifying tilt of weightless imbalance. The officer shoved forward again, yanking the chair back onto the path, then rocked it like a cruel game. Forward and back, each jerk slamming Harold's tailbone against the seat. "Stop!" The word ripped from Harold's throat before he could soften it. "Please, sir, please." A child whimpered somewhere behind him, quickly hushed by a parent. The wind shifted through the trees, leaves whispering like voices that wouldn't speak out loud. Harold tried to orient himself by sound, by distance. A dog collar jingled to the left. A stroller's wheels clicked over a shallow crack to the right. Close. People were close. He focused on the nearness of others and tried to draw strength from it, as if proximity alone could keep him from being erased. But the officer kept at it. "Look at me when I talk to you," the man barked. I can't," Harold said softly, and hated the tremor that rode through the words. "Then listen when I talk to you," the officer said, mocking his blindness. "Here's the rule. You don't plant yourself and make decent folks uncomfortable." "I'm sitting at the edge of the path," Harold said. "I'm not blocking anyone." He wasn't sure why he tried reason. Reason had no purchase here. Still, it rose from habit, some last stubborn fragment of faith in order. The officer's answer was a disgusted noise. The chair jolted once more. Then rough hands found Harold's shoulders and shook him. His head knocked against the chair back. The world swam. For a moment, the sounds came from far away, as if he were submerged. "I'm begging you," Harold said. "Please." "Beg louder," the officer said. "Maybe someone will care." Boot steps scuffed on his left, the tentative approach of another person. A woman's voice came, thin with nerves. "Officer, he's not doing anything." The air tightened. The officer's attention snapped toward her. Harold could feel it, the way a room changes when a predator considers a new target. "You want to be next?" the man said. Silence. Then retreating steps. Harold's stomach sank. He didn't blame her. He did not want anyone else to be hurt. But the loneliness of that silence, that was something he would remember. The hands returned to the chair grips. The officer pushed again, faster now, as if racing no one. Harold's breath hitched with every seam and divot in the pavement. The path sloped downward toward a low curb. When the front wheels hit it, the chair jolted. The rear wheels lifted for a terrifying inch before slapping back to earth. Harold cried out. He could not stop it. "Didn't like that?" the officer said, breathless with his own exertion or with glee. "Let's try something else." The chair came to an abrupt stop. Fingers curled into Harold's shirt collar and yanked, dragging him forward. His chest struck the lap belt. He felt his cane, folded and resting across his thighs, slip, clatter to the pavement, then disappear somewhere under the chair. Panic flared bright and hot. Without the cane, the world felt even further away. "Please, give me my cane," Harold said. "Please." The officer ignored him. A palm smacked the side of Harold's face, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to shame. Harold's skin stung. His eyes watered reflexively, though they could not see. The man chuckled under his breath as if the sound of another person's pain amused him. "Answer me when I talk to you," he said. "Yes, sir," Harold whispered. The words tasted like old rust. "What are you doing here?" "Listening to the trees. Harold stopped. The truth suddenly sounded small and foolish. "Sitting," he finished. "Why here?" It's quiet." "Not anymore." Another kick landed, blunt against Harold's calf. His legs spasmed. He drew his knees inward by instinct, but the footrest trapped his feet, and the motion only pulled at aching muscles. The officer leaned in close. "You think you belong here?" he asked. "Answer." Harold's mouth went dry. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, the steady press of the lap belt across his waist. "I belong wherever I am allowed to be," he said carefully, and hoped the officer heard humility rather than defiance. But pride, even in tatters, has a way of peeking through. The grip on the chair tightened. Smart mouth. The shove this time sent the chair skating sideways. One wheel hit the edge of the lawn. The other, still on pavement, spun faster, twisting the chair at an angle. Harold braced again for the teetering lift, his body tensing as the center of gravity slid perilously. At the last instant, the officer yanked the handles back and slammed the chair down, the jolt thunderous through Harold's spine. A murmur rippled through the small crowd, soft, uncertain, but real. Harold latched onto it with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for a branch. Someone coughed, someone else said, "Hey," and then trailed off. A pair of sneakers scraped closer, a second pair retreated. Courage moved in pulses, a step forward, a step back. The officer turned, projecting his voice outward. "Keep walking," he barked. "Nothing to see here." Harold felt anger flare inside him, not the hot rage that burns everything, but the stubborn ember that refuses to die. He had done nothing wrong. He had asked for nothing more than a bench of sunlight and the sound of wind. He pressed his palms against the armrests and drew himself up an inch, two as much as his body allowed. "I have the right to be here," he said very quietly. "What did you say?" The question cracked like the snap of a baton opening. Harold took a slow breath. "I said I have the right to be here." The next kick came fast. It caught the metal footrest and ricocheted into Harold's ankle. Pain flared, bright as lightning. The officer's voice lowered to an intimate hiss. "Rights?" he sneered. "You think paper protects you out here? Paper doesn't protect anyone." Harold's hands trembled. He forced them to stillness. He would not give this man the satisfaction of watching him shake. Around them, the world continued to move, the city breathing in and out, but the park's small stage had narrowed to two roles, the man in uniform and the man in the chair. Harold could feel the setting harden into that awful shape, as though the day itself had agreed to witness his humiliation. That was the worst part, the theater of it. Not the pain, not even the threats, but the way suffering was turned outward, displayed, made a spectacle. A breeze rose and fell. Somewhere, a gull cried, lost so far inland that the sound seemed out of place. Harold listened to it and thought of faraway water, the way waves can erode even stone given enough time. He clung to that thought: erosion, persistence, surviving by staying. "Please," he said again, because the body has its own reflexes, and pleading is one of them. "Please let me be." The officer's answer was a long, contemptuous exhale. He stepped around to the front of the chair. Harold felt, rather than saw, the man's gaze raking over him, searching for the next small cruelty. The toe of the boot lifted Harold's fallen cane, nudged it closer, then kicked it away again so it clicked end over end into the grass. A childish gesture distilled into malice. "Fetch," the officer said. "I can't see," Harold replied, the words steady now, as if steadiness itself could be armor. "That's your problem." The crowd had thickened. Harold could taste it, the collective presence of people, their warmth, their shifting weight. A throat cleared. A low voice murmured, "This isn't right." Another answered, "Don't get involved." The chorus of caution, old as fear. The officer took hold of the wheelchair's handles once more. This time he pushed Harold forward and then, abruptly, let go. The chair rolled a few feet on its own. Harold's breath caught. Without hands on the grips, he felt like a raft cut free. He reached for the wheels to slow himself, palms skidding against rubber, but the momentum carried him to the edge of the path again. The front casters thumped down off the curb and lodged. The sudden stop snapped his shoulders forward. Pain spiked between his shoulder blades. The officer ambled up behind him, slow as boredom. "Clumsy," he said. "You're going to hurt yourself." Harold sat very still. He felt a strange calm descend, a clarity that sometimes follows terror. He could not make the man treat him as human through reason. He could not appeal to mercy that wasn't there. What he could do, the only thing left, was refuse to vanish, to sit upright, to answer clearly, to be present, fully, in a body that another man was trying to reduce to an object. "Sir," he said, voice even, "you're wearing a badge. That badge means something." He paused to breathe. "Please remember it." For a heartbeat, the air held. Perhaps the officer heard the dignity in the plea and recognized it for what it was, a line the old man would not surrender. Or perhaps the pause meant nothing at all. A hand slammed onto Harold's chest, open-palmed, pressing him back against the chair. Fingers hooked into the neckline of his shirt and yanked until the fabric bit his skin. The man bent close enough for Harold to feel the heat of his breath. "Here's what it means," the officer said softly, the softness more frightening than a shout. "It means I decide what happens." Then the pressure lifted, only to return in a different form as the officer's hand closed on the chair's handle again. He wrenched the chair back up onto the path, spun it in a tight, dizzying half-circle, and brought it to a stop that rocked Harold forward and back like a pendulum. Another kick, swift, practiced, tapped the side of the chair, a punctuation mark on the wordless sentence of dominance. No one spoke. The wind moved. A squirrel darted across the grass with reckless confidence. Harold listened to these ordinary things and wondered how the world could keep being ordinary while a piece of his dignity was being peeled away, thin strip by thin strip. It did not last forever, though it felt like it might. Humiliation rarely does. It consumes itself, craving bigger and bigger spectacle until it draws something larger to the scene: conscience, courage, consequence. Harold felt it a moment before it happened. A shift at the edge of the crowd. A collective intake of breath. The kind of silence that isn't emptiness, but preparation. Footsteps approached, not hurried, not timid, grounded and deliberate, heavy with purpose, The officer's hand stilled on the chair. The air around Harold sharpened, as if the day had suddenly focused. He did not know who was coming. He knew only that the rhythm of the park had changed, that the lonely theater of his suffering had gained new actors, and that the script might, just might, turn. Harold straightened as much as the ache would allow and fixed his face toward the sound. He did not speak. He did not plead. He simply waited, the ember inside him steadying into heat. And for the first time since the officer's shadow had fallen over him, Harold felt something other than fear rise in his chest. Hope. The silence that had smothered the park suddenly fractured. New footsteps approached from the far side of the path, heavy, confident, unhurried. They carried none of the menace of the officer's boots, nor the hesitation of bystanders too afraid to intervene. These were purposeful steps, sure and grounded, the kind that announced strength without needing to shout. Harold sensed it immediately. Years of blindness had sharpened his awareness of sound and presence, and he could feel how the air shifted when they arrived. The crowd, which had been frozen in nervous indecision, stirred. Murmurs rose, hushed gasps, a swell of recognition. Two voices cut through the tension, deep and unmistakable. "Hey!" one of them barked, sharp and commanding. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The officer froze. His hand still gripped the back of Harold's chair, but his authority cracked under the sudden weight of those voices. Harold turned his head slightly, as if trying to see through the dark that had long replaced his sight. He didn't know who they were, but he heard something in their tone. Outrage, yes, but also certainty. These were not ordinary men. The officer sneered, masking his moment of hesitation with bravado. "Move along. Nothing to see here," but the crowd's murmurs surged, louder this time, fueled by the arrival of the two strangers. Phones lifted higher. A child whispered, "It's him. It's really him." Another voice added, "And that's, oh my God, it's them." Harold couldn't see their faces, but the world around him reacted as if giants had entered the scene. The second voice spoke, calm but firm, every syllable weighted with control. "You're kicking an old man in a wheelchair. That ends now." The officer turned, and though Harold couldn't witness it, the crowd saw the shift. His sneer faltered when his eyes fell on the men before him. John Cena and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stood side by side, sweat still darkening their shirts from training, their broad shoulders blocking the sun. Their expressions were grim, carved in stone. "You've gotta be kidding me," someone in the crowd whispered, their voice tinged with awe. Cena stepped forward first, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the officer. "You think picking on a blind man makes you strong?" His voice rumbled with barely contained anger. "You think a badge gives you the right to humiliate him?" The officer bristled, forcing himself not to back away. "I said move along. This is police business." Dwayne's laugh was low, humorless. "Police business looks more like abuse." He gestured toward Harold, who sat trembling but upright in his chair. "We saw everything, and so did everyone else." He swept his hand toward the ring of people, many of whom were recording the scene on their phones. The officer's eyes flicked around nervously. Dozens of lenses pointed his way, capturing his every move. His arrogance cracked, but pride wouldn't let him yield. Instead, he barked, "Step aside, both of you. You've got no authority here." John Cena crossed his arms, unmoving. "We don't need authority to protect someone from a bully." The officer's face flushed red. He dropped his hand from Harold's chair and squared his stance. "You want to interfere? Fine, interfere." He unclipped his baton, the metallic snap sharp in the tense air. Harold flinched at the sound, recognizing it instantly. His breath caught in his throat, but the two men before him didn't flinch. Cena shifted subtly, his weight lowering, his fist curling as if instinct alone prepared him for the strike. Dwayne stepped half a pace forward, placing himself directly between Harold and the officer. "Try it," the Rock said evenly. His voice was soft but carried like thunder. "See what happens." The officer hesitated again. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from two of the most recognizable men in the world, men who were not only famous but feared for their strength. Yet fear turned quickly to fury. His pride demanded a show of dominance. With a sharp shout, he swung the baton in a vicious arc towards Cena. But the strike never landed. Cena's hand shot out, catching the officer's wrist mid-swing. The crowd erupted in gasps. With the twist of his arm, Cena forced the baton downward, wrenched it from the officer's grasp, and tossed it aside. The weapon clattered across the pavement. The officer stumbled back, startled. Dwayne moved in then, his massive frame a wall of defiance. He leaned close, his voice a growl only the officer could hear. "Touch him again," he said, nodding toward Harold, "and you won't be getting back up." The crowd roared its approval. Applause broke out, whistles, shouts of encouragement. Phones captured every second, beams of sunlight glinting off camera lenses like spotlights on a stage. For the first time that day, Harold felt something other than pain or humiliation. He felt defended. The officer, red-faced and trembling with fury, spat on the ground. "You think this is over? You think you can just walk in here and challenge me?" He fumbled for his radio, raising it to his lips. "Unit 4 requesting immediate backup. Officer under attack." The words hung heavy in the air. Harold's stomach dropped. He knew what those words meant. More were coming. But before fear could root him again, he felt the steady weight of a hand on his shoulder. Strong, reassuring. He didn't need sight to know it belonged to Dwayne Johnson. "You're safe now," Dwayne said. "We're not going anywhere." Beside him, Cena turned to face the park's entrance, his expression unreadable but his body ready, taut with energy. He spoke quietly, but his words carried all the same. Let them come. And so the balance of the day shifted. The officer's cruelty had drawn strength to the scene, strength far greater than he could control. The world would not watch in silence anymore. For Harold, still shaking but no longer alone, the ember of hope he'd felt earlier grew brighter. The fight wasn't finished, but the tide had begun to turn. The officer's call for backup echoed through the park like a flare shot into the sky. The radio crackled in his grip, his voice sharp and trembling as he repeated, "Officer under attack. Immediate assistance required at Greenfield Park. Repeat, officer under attack." Those words were lies, but Harold knew how dangerous they were. He sat stiff in his chair, clutching the armrests as if they could anchor him. He could feel the change around him, the energy of the crowd surging, swelling with indignation, but also the dread that came with the knowledge that more uniforms would soon arrive. John Cena stood like a fortress before him, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, eyes locked on the officer who had abused Harold minutes earlier. Beside him, Dwayne Johnson was a wall of strength, his massive hands flexing at his sides, his jaw tight with fury barely held in check. They weren't just standing in defense, they were coiled, ready for the inevitable storm. The officer smirked despite the crowd's outrage. He had backup coming, and the swagger of his authority returned with every second that passed. "You boys really want to do this?" he taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You think you can take on the police?" "You're not the police," Dwayne said, his voice low but carrying. "You're a disgrace wearing a badge." The officer's eyes flickered with rage. He raised his voice, projecting to the crowd. "These two assaulted an officer. You all saw it." But the crowd shouted back immediately, their voices loud and defiant. "Liar!" someone yelled. "We've got it all on camera," another shouted. A chorus followed. "We saw everything." Phones rose higher, dozens of recording lights blinking like tiny stars. The officer's smirk faltered. He glanced at the cameras, but it was too late. The world had already judged him. And then the sound arrived. Sirens. Distant at first, welling through the city streets, then closer, sharper, until they pierced the air of the park. Tires screeched as patrol cars pulled up along the curb. Doors slammed. Heavy boots struck the pavement in unison. Harold's chest tightened. He heard the thundering approach of multiple officers. They moved quickly, trained, and when they arrived, they fanned out in formation. He could hear the clinking of gear, the hiss of radios, the clipped orders barked between them. "What's the situation?" one demanded. The abusive officer pointed at Cena and Johnson. "Those two assaulted me. Arrest them." The words sparked outrage in the crowd. Boos, shouts, curses filled the air. Someone screamed, "He was beating an old blind man. Don't you dare arrest them." Another voice added, "It's all on video." But the backup officers didn't address the crowd. Their eyes narrowed on John and Dwayne. Batons slid free from belts. Hands hovered near holstered weapons. The air grew heavier, more dangerous with every passing second. John raised his hand slowly, not in surrender but to show calm. "We didn't start this," he said, his voice steady. "We stepped in to protect a defenseless man." Dwayne stepped closer to Harold's chair, one massive hand resting gently on the backrest as if to shield him. This man was being kicked, pushed, humiliated. "We're not leaving him." The leading officer's jaw tensed. "Stand down, now." The abusive cop sneered from behind his reinforcements, emboldened again. "Yeah, let's see how tough you are now." The moment snapped. The first officer lunged forward with his baton raised. The crowd screamed. Phones jostled in the air. Harold's hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles ached. John Cena moved first. The baton swung toward him, but he sidestepped, grabbed the officer's wrist and twisted. The weapon clattered to the ground. With a shove, Cena sent the man stumbling backward, landing flat on the pavement. Gasps and cheers erupted from the crowd. Another officer rushed at Dwayne, aiming to strike. But the rock caught the baton mid-swing, yanked it from the man's hands, and snapped it cleanly across his knee. The pieces fell to the ground with a crack. "Not today," he growled. Chaos erupted. More officers surged forward. Cena ducked and weaved, his fists like iron, blocking blows and redirecting bodies with a swift, controlled force. Johnson planted himself like a mountain, swinging wide arcs that sent attackers sprawling across the grass. They didn't fight with malice. They fought with precision, protecting Harold at all costs. The crowd roared in support. "Get them, John! Get him, Rock!" Shouts and chants filled the air, turning the park into an arena. Every time an officer fell back, phones captured it, cementing the truth in digital proof that would spread far beyond these trees. Harold couldn't see the fight, but he felt it. He felt the ground tremble with heavy impacts, heard the sharp exhale of bodies hitting the dirt, the metallic clang of dropped weapons. And above it all, he heard the voices of his defenders, steady, unyielding. "You're done!" Cena shouted as he blocked another baton and shoved its wielder to the ground. "This man's not alone anymore," Dwayne bellowed, tossing another officer aside like he weighed nothing. The abusive cop stayed behind the line, shouting for his colleagues to overpower them, but one by one they fell. Cena's fists struck with thunderous precision. The rock's strength sent men sprawling. Batons snapped, radios skittered across the pavement, and sirens blared in the distance as more cars arrived, only to see their colleagues already defeated. Minutes felt like hours, but the tide was undeniable. The park had become a battleground, and John and Dwayne owned it. Finally, the last officer stumbled back, clutching his arm, too afraid to advance. The ground was littered with groaning men, their uniforms smeared with dirt and sweat. The abusive officer looked around, his face pale now, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of his own failure. The crowd exploded into cheers. Applause thundered. Whistles pierced the air. "Justice!" someone screamed. "Heroes!" another shouted. Harold sat trembling, tears slipping down his cheeks, not from pain this time, but from something else, something stronger. Relief, gratitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't alone against cruelty. John knelt beside him, his voice soft now, breaking through the chaos. "Are you all right, sir?" Harold reached out, and Cena's strong hand closed around his trembling one. "You're safe," John said firmly. Dwayne stood tall, scanning the defeated officers and the furious crowd. His voice carried over the noise, heavy with finality. "This isn't over," he said. "The truth is coming out." And with the cameras still rolling, with the park echoing in chants of support, the truth was already unstoppable. When the dust settled, the park looked like a battlefield. Officers lay groaning on the ground, some clutching arms, others too dazed to rise. Broken batons and scuffed radios littered the pavement. The abusive cop stood among them, his chest heaving, his face pale and contorted, with rage, but he did not step forward again. He had called for reinforcements, and now they were sprawled at the feet of two men who had refused to back down. The crowd surged closer. Their fear, once paralyzing, had transformed into outrage and triumph. Voices rang out, overlapping, louder than the distant wail of fresh sirens now circling the city blocks. "We saw everything," someone shouted. "They saved him," cried another. Phones remained high in the air, recording every detail, every word, every bruise left on Harold's frail body. Social media was already swallowing the story whole, spreading it beyond the boundaries of the park. Harold sat trembling in his chair, his breath shallow but steadying. Pain throbbed in his leg and shoulder, but his heart carried something stronger than pain now. Relief. He had been beaten, humiliated, mocked, but he had not been left alone. He reached out into the air, searching. "I'm here," John Cena said, kneeling beside him again. He took Harold's hand and squeezed it firmly. "You're safe," Dwayne Johnson added, his deep voice grounding Harold like an anchor. Harold's lips trembled. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you both." The sirens grew louder. More cars arrived, but this time their approach was cautious. Officers stepped out, bewildered by the sight before them. Half a dozen of their colleagues defeated, the crowd chanting, the names Cena and The Rock shouted like battle cries. The arriving officers did not rush forward. They could see they were entering not just a scene of violence, but a scene already claimed by witnesses and cameras. "Arrest them!" the abusive cop screamed, pointing at Cena and Johnson. His voice cracked, desperate now. "They assaulted officers. They attacked me." The crowd erupted in fury. "Liar! We filmed it. You beat that old man." The air bristled with indignation. People closed ranks around Harold, Cena, and Dwayne, their bodies forming a wall of protection. For the first time all day, the power did not belong to the uniform. The senior officer, who had just arrived, raised his hands to calm the crowd. His eyes flicked to the countless phones, the sea of witnesses, the bruised and broken officers lying on the ground. He hesitated. The narrative his colleague tried to spin was already crumbling. Still, procedure demanded action. He gestured, and two officers approached. Cena and Johnson did not resist when handcuffs clicked around their wrists. Their eyes remained steady, their jaws set with resolve. "You got the wrong men," a woman cried. "They were heroes." The senior officer said nothing. He avoided the eyes of the crowd, knowing the truth but bound by the machinery of the system. Harold's chest tightened with panic. "No," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Not them. They saved me. They saved me." An officer bent down to steady him, but Harold slapped the hand away. His dignity, though battered, was still intact. "You can't arrest the only men who stood up." Dwayne leaned down as he was guided away. His voice was calm, reassuring. "Don't worry, Harold. This isn't the end." Cena added firmly, "The truth's on our side. Stay strong." The crowd followed as the men were escorted toward the cars, chanting their names, demanding justice. "Free them! Justice for Harold! We saw it all!" Their voices filled the air like a storm. The abusive cop tried to hide behind his remaining colleagues, but cameras caught every angle of his face, every sneer, every kick he had delivered. His name spread through the crowd like wildfire, repeated again and again until it was etched into memory. Hours later, in the quiet of a hospital room, Harold sat with his leg bandaged and his ribs checked for fractures. The antiseptic smell stung his nose, but the pain of humiliation weighed heavier than his injuries. A nurse held his hand gently as she assured him he was safe now. On the television in the corner, the story was already breaking. News anchors repeated the shocking footage: a blind black man beaten in his wheelchair by a police officer, rescued by John Cena and Dwayne Johnson. Clips showed the officers swarming, the fight, the cheers of the crowd. Then came the image of Cena and Johnson being led away in handcuffs. Harold turned his head toward the sound. His sightless eyes brimmed with tears, but not of despair this time. The world had seen. The truth was no longer a whisper. In another corner of the city, lawyers prepared statements, civil rights groups mobilized, and hashtags trended at lightning speed. The weight of silence had shattered. For Cena and Johnson, the night brought cold cells and waiting, but they did not fear it. They had walked into the storm knowingly, and they knew the world was watching. For Harold, lying in his hospital bed, the ember of hope that had sparked in the park burned, brighter now. He could feel it deep inside. Change was coming. The fight was not finished, but for once it was not his alone. The courthouse was packed. The case had exploded across the country in just a matter of days, fueled by footage that showed every kick, every shove, every moment of Harold's humiliation, and the unflinching defense John Cena and Dwayne Johnson had given him. Outside, protesters filled the steps, holding signs that read "Justice for Harold," "Protect the Vulnerable," and "Heroes, Not Criminals." Television crews jostled for position. Reporters shouted into cameras, and social media swirled with anticipation. Inside, Harold sat in the front row of the courtroom. His wheelchair was angled slightly toward the center, his bandaged leg resting carefully. Though he could not see the faces around him, he felt their presence, the hum of hundreds of breaths, the tension that thickened the air. His hand trembled in his lap, but his heart held steady. For the first time in years, he believed justice might finally be possible. When John Cena and Dwayne Johnson were led into the courtroom, the crowd stirred. Even in suits, with the weight of false charges on their shoulders, they radiated strength. Their eyes searched the room until they found Harold, and when they did, they both gave him the smallest of nods, assurance, solidarity. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and silence fell. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Cena and Johnson as aggressors who had interfered in police business. They claimed the officers had been attacked, overwhelmed by celebrities who thought fame put them above the law. The abusive cop himself took the stand, his face bruised but his arrogance unshaken. "They came at me without warning," he said, his voice sharp. I was performing my duty. They blindsided me and incited the crowd. They assaulted law enforcement. I feared for my life." The words dripped with venom, but the courtroom murmured with disbelief. People had seen the truth with their own eyes. The judge rapped the gavel for order, but the damage to the officer's credibility was already clear. Then came the defense. One by one, witnesses stepped forward. Bystanders who had recorded everything. Mothers who had shielded their children from the sight of Harold being beaten. Teenagers who had streamed the entire ordeal live. Screens lit up in the courtroom, playing the videos back. Every shove of Harold's chair, every cruel word, every kick. The officer's voice calling for backup with a lie. "Officer under attack." And then the footage shifted. Cena catching the baton mid-swing, Johnson snapping another across his knee. Their bodies positioned not to harm, but to shield Harold, their voices ringing out, "He's safe now. We're not going anywhere." The jury leaned forward. The judge's expression hardened. The prosecution shuffled papers but had nothing left to argue. The truth was unshakable. Finally, Harold was called. A hush fell as he was wheeled to the stand. He adjusted himself, folded his hands in his lap, and spoke with a trembling but steady voice. "I am blind," he began softly. "I came to the park that day for peace. I was doing nothing but listening to the trees and the laughter of children. That officer, he treated me like I was nothing. He pushed me, he kicked me. He mocked me for being blind, for being old, for being black. I begged him to stop." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "If not for John Cena and Dwayne Johnson, I don't know if I'd still be here today. They did not attack officers. They defended a defenseless man." The silence after his words was heavier than any gavel. The judge called for closing arguments, but everyone in the room already knew the verdict. It came swiftly, delivered by the foreperson of the jury. Not guilty. The words rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Relief broke across Cena and Johnson's faces, though they had carried themselves with composure all along. Harold bowed his head, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. The crowd in the gallery erupted, the judge's gavel striking in vain against the thunder of applause. But it was not over. The judge ordered the abusive officer to stand. His arrogance had drained away, replaced by dread. He shifted nervously as the judge read the charges against him. Assault, abuse of authority, falsifying reports. The evidence was overwhelming, the footage undeniable. "You disgrace the badge you wore," the judge said sternly. "This court will not permit such violence to be hidden under the shield of authority. You will be remanded into custody to await sentencing." Gasps and cheers filled the room. The officer's face went white as deputies stepped forward to handcuff him. He struggled, shouting, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of approval. Cameras caught it all. The fall of the man who had once believed he could abuse with impunity. John and Dwayne walked free, their heads held high. As they stepped down from the defense table, they moved straight toward Harold. Cena knelt beside him, gripping his hand with quiet strength. "We told you, Harold," he said, his voice low but resolute. "The truth was on our side." Dwayne rested a hand on Harold's shoulder, warm and solid. "You're not alone anymore." Outside, the courthouse steps erupted in cheers. Protesters cheered as heroes emerged, banners waving, chants rising into the sky. Reporters swarmed, but the only image that mattered was the three of them together. Harold in his wheelchair, flanked by the men who had refused to let him be erased. For Harold, the pain of that day in the park would never fully leave him. But now, when he thought of it, he would remember not just the kicks, the shoves, the humiliation. He would remember the moment hope returned. He would remember that when cruelty struck, courage answered, and the world would remember too. Justice was served, but the fight for truth never ends. Subscribe for more stories, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments.